Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Perez. I work for Spec. I am the brand manager. The new position started about a year and a half ago, and I'm in charge of Monticello company. As you know, I would like to really thank the Normal Court people, and Chris Corley and the Corley family for being here and hosting our first ever virtual wine tasting in Monticello. Yes. I hope you enjoyed the piano playing by Chris Corley. That was live and special just for us.
Oh, wow.
Piano they have set up there at the winery. And it was very nice. Thank you, Chris. As you know, here at Spec, we do educational functions. We do a lot of wine tastings. We try to educate our customers, our employees. We spend a lot of time doing that. I know you're familiar with the Specs story of Specs. That's been about 51 years now. It is a family-owned company, just as the Monticello Winery. Just as the Monticello Winery is a family-owned company, and that's why we really wanted to partner with them to do this. So I think it's a great event. Some of the other people here in the room were Ralph Castellano, which I'm sure you know has been here for, he was legal enough to drink.
I wasn't legal to drink, but I could work here.
And this is my daughter Kylie, and we have Mark Clark here, who is the broker for Monticello. And
if anyone is in social media and you would like to tweet, we also have a hashtag, #Spec. So we're going to be tweeting the event as well, and we are going to also have this session available pre-recorded, so we can upload it all to our different websites and promote it as well in social media.
Now we're going to see a video about the Corley family and about the vineyards there in California. And without much ado, I want to turn the tasting over to Chris Corley and Monticello.
Okay, well, hello everybody. My name's Chris Corley with Monticello Vineyards, and I'm sitting here with my dad, Jay Corley, the founder of the vineyard, and my brother, Kevin Corley, who's the president and the manager of the vineyards here. I do all the winemaking here at Monticello and some of the piano playing. And we've got a fantastic tasting set up for you today that we're going to incorporate a little bit of music into, which I hope that you'll find fun and interesting and hopefully educational as well. And we thought we might start off the presentation with our dad, who founded the company back in the early 1970s, to give you a little bit of a history straight from the founder. So this is Jay Corley.
Greetings, one and all. Very happy to participate in this special program. You might not know it, but I have been visiting Specs many times, and I know exactly where you are and the facilities. I go back more than 30 years of my visits. I am the founder, the chairman, and now I'm in charge of cheerleading as my 3 sons, 2 are here, conduct our business. When I founded the winery, the whole idea of Monticello was to grow our own grapes as an estate, produce wines that would be very harmonious with meals. And so we did have a chef with us for a long time, and as we tried to make our way into the business, we introduced our wines to the media by having prepared meals and dinners here at the winery. But we've passed that phase of our operation now, and we're now focusing on some very special wines, and I think that tonight we're going to share some of those with you. So I'm going to turn this back over to Chris and to Kevin, and I'm very pleased to be a part of what's going on. Thank you.
One of the first wines that we're going to taste is the Chardonnay, but maybe before I get to that, I'll have Kevin give a little bit of a background about our vineyards in general, and you guys can understand some of the different varietals that we're growing here in the Oak Knoll district, and also up in Yountville and Rutherford and St. Helena, up in the northern parts of the Napa Valley. Kevin manages all of the vineyards and oversees all the decisions regarding pretty much everything that happens in the vineyard. So he can fill you in a little bit on the grapes, and then we'll start talking about the wines.
Good evening, everybody. I can tell you that we have 5 vineyards in Napa Valley. From the southern part of the valley, just very north of the town of Napa, all the way up to St. Helena. The Chardonnay is from what we refer to as our home ranch. It's the first vineyard. It was planted originally in 1970. It's in what's called the Oak Knoll district, which is the 14th sub-appellation of Napa Valley. It is relatively cool. It has a fair amount of influence from the San Francisco Bay Area, so we get generally the coolest temperatures in the valley are right here. It, especially in 1970, was much sought out for Chardonnay. In the intervening years, we've realized with improved farming techniques, we can grow additional grapes as well. But Chardonnay was one of the first things that we started with, and in fact, it was probably 70% of our grape growing production when the vineyard was first planted. And maybe now's a good time to put some in our glasses and taste it.
So our 2011 Estate Chardonnay is a 100% Chardonnay wine. We don't blend any other white varietals with our Chardonnay. That's not just true for 2011, but true for all of our vintages of Chardonnay. All of the Chardonnay is grown, as Kevin mentioned, on our property here in the Oak Knoll district. And we've got a number of different clones that we grow, and the clones are sub-designations of the wider varietal of Chardonnay. So most of the clones that we've selected, we'll choose them for different attributes of flavor or different abilities to ripeness or deal with our weather that we have here. We have different methods of producing our Chardonnay that we've developed over the years. And because we've been growing grapes and making wine for a pretty long time, at least by Napa Valley standards, this is our 41st vintage of making wine here in Napa Valley. As you can imagine, not only have our methods changed, but as an industry, I think things have changed. And we're picking grapes a little bit riper than we were when our dad first started in the early 70s. And what I look for in our Chardonnay, what Kevin and I both look for in the Chardonnay, is to get a nice ripeness with the fruit. And by ripeness, we're looking for nice, ripe, tropical fruit tones in the aromas and in the flavors of the wine, a nice, ripe, rich texture in the wine, but it also needs to be very well balanced with the acidity. And when we're trying to figure out the right time to pick these grapes, we need to make these decisions, as you know, when we're dealing with grapes in the vineyard. And one of our most important parameters in walking through the field is just touching the grapes, feeling them, picking them off the vine, chewing on them, feeling how the skin of the berry comes into your mouth. Is it soft? Is it taut? Does the flesh of the berry come apart from the seed easily? Are the seeds brown or green? These are very tactile experiences, and are some of the most important factors in us deciding when we're going to pick the grapes. We do keep a pretty extensive log of all the data that we're tracking, but really when it all boils down to it, these decisions are largely tactile, hedonistic type decisions. And over the years, we've grown to trust our judgment. This wine in particular, 2011, was a very interesting vintage. It was a cooler vintage, and it presented us with an opportunity to let the grapes hang on the vines for a very long time without the sugar accumulating too much. And this was a very nice situation for us in 2011. We were able to achieve some very nice ripe flavors and aromas without the accompanying high sugars. So the alcohol in this wine is a little bit lower than usual for us. It's about 13.8%. And I find this wine to have a very beautiful balance of flavors, aromas, texture, wonderful balance of acidity, and a nice finish. And you may be wondering how I know that without tasting it, but I'm very familiar with this wine. Cheers. Does anybody, now that you've had an opportunity to taste this wine, do you have any questions about anything regarding the Chardonnay, any of the winemaking techniques or any grape growing vineyard questions that may be on your mind?
What type of barrels do you use?
The question was, what type of barrels do we use? And with our Chardonnay, we use all French oak barrels. We use medium-grained barrels. When we first started making wine, a lot of the French oak was designated by forest regions. So when we started, we would use barrels such as Allier from the Allier forest in France and the Vosges forest in France. Most barrels are now classified not by the forest name, but by the tightness of the grain. So we tend to use medium-grained French oak barrels for our Chardonnay. We're not very heavy-handed with our use of new oak in our wines. We're striving for balance. With our estate Chardonnay, it's not unusual for us to have maybe about a third new French oak, meaning that if we had 10 barrels, 3 of them might be brand new barrels, and the other 7 would be once or twice used barrels. And for us, that strikes a nice balance with the wine. Any other questions regarding the winemaking of the Chardonnay, or even any comments on your experience?
Sure.
She said she's not a Chardonnay fan, but she really enjoys that wine. Very good.
That's what we're looking for.
That's what we like to hear.
We have another question. Question is, how do you compare the 2011 vintage with the vintages in the past?
The 2011 vintage was a cooler growing season, and I think in recent years it reminded me, from a winemaking perspective, maybe of 2005, just in terms of the quality of the fruit, and specifically to Chardonnay. Why I say that is we had an opportunity to ripen the grapes for a very long time without a resulting increase in a lot of sugar in the wine. 2011 was also a fairly small crop for us, which is in contrast to 2005. But in terms of the quality of the fruit, I think of 2005 when I think of our 2011 vintage.
Anyone else? The question is, how many cases do you produce of this Chardonnay?
It varies a little bit each year, but roughly 2,000 cases of Chardonnay. Right now, we're in the process of replanting a few of our Chardonnay blocks, and we're very excited about this. It's just the third time, maybe the third time? Mm-hmm. The third time in our 40-year history that we've replanted. So replanting for us is an exciting opportunity for us to take advantage of new plant material, new clones or rootstocks, or just even new planting ideas that may have developed since the last time that we planted. So the last time we planted some of these blocks was 15 or more years ago, and so we've learned a lot, and that gives us a good chance to get some new ideas into the ground and eventually into the bottle.
The question is, when you char the barrels, is that for white wines as well as red wines?
When we char the barrels, yeah, we do toast all the barrels that we use. We toast them differently for different wines, and a simple way for me to answer that question, because it's very specific to many of the different wines that we make, is the bigger the wine, the heavier the toast we might employ with the particular barrel that we're using. So with our Chardonnay, we tend not to have a very heavy toast or heavy char on the barrel. It's usually a lighter toast. In contrast to, for example, our Reserve Cabernet, which is a very big, robust Cabernet Sauvignon, those barrels would have a heavier toast imparted on them.
Anyone else? The question is, what are the average age of your Pinot Noir vines?
We have 2 blocks of Pinot Noir currently, and they are 13 and 14 years old, respectively. We've had a good history with Pinot Noir ever since the vineyard was first planted. We have introduced 4 new clones in these plantings, and they have done great and are going full speed ahead.
I noticed that the level of quality
Any more questions about the Chardonnay? I hope you're enjoying the Brie with the Chardonnay. The Brie was picked out to go with the Chardonnay. We thought it would be a good complement to the wine. Hope you're enjoying that. And I guess now we're ready to move on to the next wine. Chris?
Okay. So our next wine is our 2010 estate-grown Pinot Noir. Again, a 100% estate-grown and also 100% varietal. We don't blend any other varietals into our Pinot Noir. You may have noticed when you came in that we're sitting behind a grand piano, and this is a piano that is always in our cellar, and I really enjoy playing the piano. It's a great pleasure of mine, and it's also a great analogy or metaphor for music. It's something that we draw a lot together, and I'm going to use the Pinot Noir as an example of how we think sometimes about wine in terms of music. And when we think about the Pinot Noir, this is how my Pinot Noir makes me feel through my fingers. So by that, I mean that this Pinot Noir. So for me, this Pinot Noir is smooth. It's mellow. It's very well balanced. It's a nice, easygoing wine, and that's one of the things that I love about the Pinot Noir that we grow here in the Oak Knoll district. We're in a sweet spot in the Napa Valley here, where we have the warmth of the afternoon, but we also get the daily breeze that comes in from the north end of the San Francisco Bay. So it's really a nice balance of the weather that allows us to accomplish that balance with the Pinot Noir.
I might mention one of the terms that we think of in many aspects of our business, in terms of winemaking, in terms of vineyards, in terms of sales, in terms of our tasting room, is the word authenticity. And having a family business, we have a lot of latitude, and we can do things that just fit our family. And so when we think about making all wine, but this Pinot Noir comes to mind especially, we think about representing something from the soil, something from just this particular microclimate. Our dad got interested in drinking wines by drinking red Burgundies, the Pinot Noir grape. And so when he came to Napa Valley, he planted the vineyard mainly with Chardonnay, but some Pinot Noir. And Pinot Noir was the wine, in terms of tasting, that got him interested. And what he enjoyed was that Pinot Noir can offer full aromas and full flavors, but it doesn't have to be a big tannic wine. Our first Pinot Noir came in 1984, so it was a little after the Chardonnay, but it has been I think, our most popular wine in our tasting room since that day.
Any questions or comments on, as you've had a chance to taste the Pinot Noir?
The comment was that the Pinot Noir is not as fruity as some of the other Pinot Noirs she's tasted.
Well, we, as I mentioned, we are striving for balance, and for us, we're very pleased with the balance that we've achieved with these wines that you're tasting this evening.
Could be that's coming from that valley.
Yeah, it's interesting too, following along Kevin's comments about what brought our dad here to the Oak Knoll District. As Kevin mentioned, it was Pinot Noir really that brought him here. And to put that into a timeline perspective, in 1969, 1970, when our dad bought this property and planted it to Pinot Noir, this was about as far south as anybody was growing grapes in the Napa Valley. In fact, this property was not even a vineyard when he came in 1969. It was an old prune orchard with some old prune trees and some old black walnut trees that they tore out and planted to grapevines. So 1969 was a pretty early time, not just in the Napa Valley wine industry, but in the California industry as a whole. So a lot of the Pinot Noir regions that we are all familiar with now, such as the regions down in the Central Coast and Russian River, Paso Robles, up into Oregon and Washington, a lot of those places weren't growing many grapes back in the 1970s. And we are asked from time to time, why are you guys growing Pinot Noir in Napa Valley? Because most people do admittedly consider Napa Valley Cabernet country. And our easy answer to that is that we've always grown Pinot Noir here. And we're coming up on almost 30 plus years of growing Pinot Noir. And we're very pleased with the grapes that we grow here in terms of Pinot Noir for the reasons I mentioned, the balance of the warmth and the wind.
This Pinot Noir is a little cold toward the old world style, just a touch. A lot of the new California wineries are all about the fruit. So you buy a Pinot Noir and it tastes like this big fruit bomb. And because they're trying to stress the fruit and the grape in their vineyard. And this winery has a combination of fruit with a little terroir mixed in, a little bit of the land in there, a little bit of the old world's more elegant style, as opposed to a fruit bomb. Yes, very delicate, yes.
I think those are fair comments. I would agree that's striving for that is what we're doing, striving for that balance and that elegance, and appreciating those other characteristics in the wine besides just the fruit. Appreciating the acids and the tannins and the other elements of wine that help to round out the entire experience.
It's been asked, so how do you ferment the Pinot Noir?
We ferment the Pinot Noir mostly in small punch down bins. So we'll crush the grapes into small bins that we'll punch down by hand or with a small punch down tool. And that helps us to gently extract the tannins. Pinot Noir seeds can tend to have a high quantity or a high amount of seed tannin in them. So by doing a gentle extraction during the fermentation, we can avoid extracting too many tannins into the wine. We do a portion of our Pinot Noir in a tank, and that portion is done in tank so that we have full temperature control over it. And with that portion of our Pinot Noir, I like to ferment the grapes cooler than we do most of our other red wines. And that technique is oriented around preserving aromas in the wine and trying to keep the fresh fruit aromas preserved in the fermentation. Okay, I think we're going to move on to the next wine, which is the Merlot. So this is our 2009 estate-grown Merlot. As were the first two wines, this wine is grown entirely on our property, 100% estate-grown. It does have some Cabernet Franc blended into it, which is not uncommon for us to blend some Cabernet Franc into our Merlot. This wine is fermented in a stainless steel tank. It's aged in French oak barrels for approximately 2 years. And then we bottle this wine and generally hold on to it for a few months before release. With this wine, and you're going to hear this word with just about every single wine, again, we're striving for balance. I think if I had to pick one word that we would strive for, balance would easily be the #1 goal for us. I think you'll find that this wine has a little bit more of an oak component on the palate than the Pinot Noir did. This is because our Merlot is a little more full-bodied wine. The Cabernet Franc tends to bring in a little bit of a natural grape tannin, and as a result, this wine can carry a little higher percentage of new oak.
The crew is loving the Merlot.
We're getting good feedback from the crew on our wines here. Well, I will tell you how this wine makes me feel on the piano. I'll entertain you as you're enjoying those last sips. So that's how we feel about our Merlot. It's a groovy wine. It's a nice, easygoing wine. It's got a little bit of flash from the oak. Very well balanced. It's got a nice, solid baseline, and a little bit of flash in the treble.
Any comments or questions? We're getting a lot of great comments about the wine. Everyone is enjoying it very much. I think it is drinking wonderfully. It's very soft, a lot of good balance. Oh, great.
Absolutely.
Just more great comments about the wine.
Fantastic.
How will the Merlot age?
How do you believe the Merlot will age?
Well, this wine was bottled in 2011, so it's been in the bottle now for probably about 1.5 years. And I think this wine's going to age very gracefully for probably another 6 to 8 years, perhaps even more. One great thing that this wine's got going for it in terms of aging is that nice balance of acid and tannins, and that really helps a wine to age gracefully. The fruit is there, the wine's got plenty of fruit, and it's got the structure to carry it out for, I would guess, at least 6 to 8 more years.
Our first vintage of Merlot was 1989, which is still drinking nicely today. We have the advantage of having Merlot that's never left the property, so it's had perfect storage. And we're not promoting that somebody needs to keep it for 20 years, but the wines tend to age pretty well.
The next wine that we're going to taste is our 2010 Jefferson Cuvée Cabernet. This wine, the 2010 Cabernet Sauvignon is a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. And it's not unusual for us with this wine to have a fairly significant amount of Cabernet Franc blended in. This wine has almost a little more than 20% Cabernet Franc blended. The Cabernet Sauvignon grapes for this wine are the only varietal that we grow off of our main property here at the winery. So we have 3 vineyards that are in this wine, and these vineyards are up in Yountville, the State Lane Vineyard up in Yountville, the Tejan Vineyard, which is in Kneebaum Lane in Rutherford, and the Yule Vineyard, which is on Ellers Lane in St. Helena. The Cabernet Franc portion comes off of our property here in the Oak Knoll District. Kevin and I and our brother Steve, in fact our whole family, are very excited to have 3 new blocks of Cabernet Sauvignon being planted this year here on our 2 properties in the Oak Knoll District. And those wines will be working their way into our blends probably in the 2012 and 2013 vintages will be their first appearance in our blends. And our dad is particularly excited. We told him that we're planting the Cabernet Sauvignon up in one of the front blocks, which is block 2 up in the front of the property. And he asked what we were planting. We said Cabernet Sauvignon, and he kind of chuckled. And he said that he had briefly planted Cabernet Sauvignon in that block back in the early 70s. And the conventional wisdom at that time was that it was too cool in this area for Cabernet Sauvignon. So that was taken out, and I think we put in Chardonnay up in that block. So our dad feels somewhat vindicated, some 40 years later when his sons have come up with the great idea of putting Cabernet Sauvignon in that block. It put a big smile on his face. So we're all very excited about that, including Dad. So this Cabernet, this is a big, full-bodied Cabernet. I think this wine is drinking beautifully right now. I get lots of fruit out of it, lots of good ripe fruit. The texture on the wine it's big and full-bodied, but it's also very smooth and well-balanced. I love the long finish on the wine. Obviously, I have a very unbiased opinion, but I will show you how this wine makes me feel.
We had a comment that one of our guest mothers was a concert pianist since age 7. She'd be very proud of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We really don't know how the sound comes through to you, but I can tell you it is fantastic here. We're surrounded by barrels on one side, but we've got a lot of stainless steel tanks all through the winery, and it makes the acoustics just terrific. We invite you to come check out our piano the next time you're in Napa Valley.
That's a piano-rama he's doing there.
Oh, yes. They're viewing the
You're seeing where they are right now.
the winery right now, the barrel room. Oh, perfect. Okay. What's my bitter? For Chris, right?
Question for you, Chris. If you weren't a winemaker and vintner,
Okay.
what would you be doing right now?
Drinking wine irresponsibly.
Any questions or comments about the Cabernet?
Delicious.
Comment is the wine seems to have a lot of vanilla in it. Do you agree?
I do agree with the comment that there's vanilla in it, and that's a characteristic that I also find in the wine. There is a very small amount of American oak that we used in this wine, and that's not an oak that we use too much. This wine is predominantly French oak, but a couple of the Cabernet Franc barrels were an American oak, and I really liked what they did in the blend. It's a very small percentage, and I think that's where that component is coming from.
They want to know the usage of your barrels. How many years do you use a barrel before you get rid of it, or you change a varietal, or do what with it?
Well, barrels, a well-made barrel will last a very, very long time. Its useful life in terms of contributing to the blend, and by that I mean imparting oak flavors and oak aromas into the wine, is for me about 2 vintages. So I would answer the question saying that I consider a barrel useful for oak flavors and aromas for about 2 years. After that, it becomes a valuable aging vessel, and that's very important because oak barrels for wine are not just for flavor and aroma. Another thing that they do is allow the wine to breathe. And that's why wines that are aged in oak barrels taste different than wines that are aged in tanks. The wine that's inside the oak barrel is slowly breathing with the air outside it. The air is slowly coming into the wine, and the wine is slowly leaving the barrel. So I imagine everybody's familiar with the notion of the angel's share, the amount of wine that we lose to evaporation. Well, the wine that leaves the barrel is replaced with air, and that helps that wine to age and to develop. So barrels, even after the oak is used up, are very useful as neutral aging vessels in terms of allowing the wine to breathe. And we've had barrels that we've kept for upwards of 5, 6, 7 years with the intent purpose of using them as aging vessels.
Any more questions?
Question is, question is, what do you think the ageability of this wine is? The Cabernet.
I think that this wine's going to age really well for 15 to 20 years. As Kevin mentioned, we have the luxury of enjoying all of our wines all the way back to the 1981 vintage, and we recently had a bottle of 1986, and not too long before that we had some of our 1982 Cabernets, and those wines are still tasting graceful at this age. That's after 31 years. The wines that we're making today compared to the wines that we were making back in 1981, I think will have a slightly shorter age span, but I think that these wines will still age very gracefully for the better part of 20 or more years.
Anything else? On the very last one? Yeah. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that one just 1 second. We're finished with the Cabernet? Okay, we can move on to the next wine.
Okay. So the next wine that we're going to taste is our Corley proprietary red wine. And we're going to go back to the 2006 vintage, which will be fun for all of us. When we're blending this wine, which is a blend of Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Syrah, I believe we used in 2006. We have no rules, so to speak, when we're blending this wine. We started making our proprietary red wine in 1999, and between 1999 and our most recent blend, which is 2011, which is still in barrel, most of the time Cabernet Franc is our predominant varietal in the blend. There's just been a couple of vintages over that span that we used Merlot as the predominant varietal. So this is one of the most enjoyable wines for us to blend because we're incorporating so many different characters. We've got more varietals in this wine and more different personalities and characters than any of our other wines, and that makes it a great joy for blending.
And probably more vineyards.
And more vineyards. Yeah, we've incorporated every single one of our vineyards into this wine, and of those vineyards, multiple blocks within the vineyard. So it's a very fun wine to blend. And this wine is similar to putting together a song. So when you're putting together a wine that's got so many different components, you need to start with a little bit of a plan. And it's the same type of plan that you would start when you're writing a song. And depending on what instrument you're oriented to, you might start with a bass line, or you might start with a rhythm. And then once you get that bass line in, then you might add a melody. And then once you get the melody, you add in a harmony. And then you might write some lyrics to that. But the basic idea is that you start with an anchor, and then you build on that. So you might start with a bass line of Cabernet Franc that sounds like this. So that gives us a nice structure for the wine to build upon. And we might want to blend in some Merlot into that wine and bring that bass line together. And that melody that we bring in with the Merlot might sound a little something like this. So we kind of like how those two work together. Except we need something a little bit more, and so we're looking for the Cabernet Sauvignon. So we might look to the Cabernet Sauvignon to bring in something a little different, and that might be some of our blues notes, or we might hit a different scale, and so we might move from the D up to the F. How that's going, and now we need a little kind of finisher, and so that's the little bit of Syrah that we blended in, and that's the one that comes in at the end. And when we put all of that together, that's when we end up with the finished wine. Everything comes together.
We're talking about the flavors in the wine, and she says she's got a lot of clove in there that she smells. Which varietal do you think imparts
that's
the clove?
Coming from the Syrah, and I agree with that. I find some nice spicy characteristics that we get from the Syrah. Keep in mind too that this wine has been in the bottle now for about 5 years. We bottled this in 2008. In its youth, I find some very nice spicy notes in our Syrah, oriented around black pepper and some kind of gamey, nice kind of meat tones, and dark pepper, sometimes grilled red pepper. As those aromas develop over time, which they have in this bottle, they can tend to impart kind of a clove or cinnamon, kind of an allspice kind of aroma or flavor, and I think that's probably what she's keying in on.
They also mentioned that there was chocolate in the wine. Which varietal you contribute that to?
You know, we were just talking about that. Don just mentioned that same thing, and we find that too. I think that's a combination of all the varietals, because the chocolate tone is not something that we find in any of our other individual varietals. I think that's the combination of that blend together with the barrels that we used in 2006, and I think that's just all sort of coalescing into that flavor.
Yeah. What's the alcohol in that wine glass? You see it over there? Someone was asking the alcohol content on the wine. We were looking at the bottle.
That's a true.
Yes, it does have alcohol.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, Spec really enjoys educating their customers about the wine, and employees as well. We do a lot of classes. Education is important, and getting to taste all the different wines is very important. It's kind of hard to go down there and just buy one of everything. So,
well, it works out for you guys too because I'm starting on some more different wines, but then also when I'm on my Facebook page, I got 600 people. You got about 20% of them that like wine coming out to that.
yes. They're commenting about that we got all these people together and they're enjoying the wine and they're going to go out and do social media about the wine and some publicity for Monticello.
Yay.
All right.
That's fantastic.
I want to put the best news to everyone is that everyone should have a price sheet of all what the wines sell for, and these wines are an amazing value. You get wines of this quality in the mid-20 range, it's unheard of. These are really great values.
You guys get a lot of these people.
We do not run out. They supply us with plenty of wine. Anybody else want to say anything? Kylie? Are you married? Chris?
Yes, sorry?
Are you married?
Yes, I am. Both Kevin and I have started working on the next generation of Monticello stewards.
And that's another reason why the wines are such a great value is because they've been there for all these years. They didn't have to come in after Napa Valley became very popular and pay a bunch of money for their land. They've been there for a long time.
This is all family.
Yes. It's all family owned, just like Spec is family owned.
This was a great event.
Yes.
Had no idea we were going to be entertained as well.
That was really special. Chris, thank you very much for the piano playing. It was wonderful.
Well, we'll give you a little song in parting, and both Kevin and I want to say thank you to all of you for coming out and spending your evening with us. We appreciate you spending your time and learning a little bit about our wines and what we do here. Thank you.
May I ask one more question?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions before we sign off
Yes.
with this great music?
More question.
Yes, more questions.
More question. Where is the emphasis on Thomas Jefferson and Monticello?
The question is, where does the emphasis on Thomas Jefferson and the Monticello come from?
Well, good question. We could, if you were here, and hopefully many of you will come and visit us, and you can see, in addition to the piano, we built a building we call the Jefferson House, loosely modeled after Thomas Jefferson's home. When our dad first got interested in wine and came to Napa Valley, there were a couple of things on his mind. One is that his family our family had been involved in farming, at least every generation, we think, back to the 1750s in Virginia. He had been interested in Italian culture in particular and perceived that there were many of the pioneering families in winemaking in Napa Valley were Italian. And going back to Virginia, researching our family history, our dad got keenly interested in Thomas Jefferson, who is the father of American wine and food. Now that's more commonly accepted, but back in 1970 that was not as well known. But he chose the name Monticello as a reference to Thomas Jefferson. After we started the winery, we built a building, as I mentioned, called the Jefferson House that's loosely modeled after Thomas Jefferson's home. And I can think back in 1988, I did a series of, seems like a long time ago, I did a series of tastings because Thomas Jefferson had proclaimed when he was in Burgundy in 1788 that the United States would be making wines equal to the wines of Europe, maybe not the same, but equal in quality. And we'd like to think that Thomas Jefferson was on the mark. We've been happy to have our wines served around the world. They've been served in the White House, served for the Queen of England. the Academy Awards at Bush Library in your city, and so we think that Thomas Jefferson would be pretty pleased with what we've done.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I believe that's all the questions, Chris.